Defiant orphan girl sold for a handful of poker chips. Cattle baron took her in. The price of survival. The autumn wind of 1882 carried dust and desperation through the streets of Dry Gulch, Texas. 16-year-old Evangeline Evie McCain pressed her back against the weathered wooden wall of Murphy's saloon, her emerald eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. The setting sun painted the sky blood red, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness in her heart. There she is! The gruff voice of Jake Morrison cut through the evening air like a rusty blade. The little thief who's been stealing from my store. Evie's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't stolen anything. She'd simply taken the moldy bread Morrison had thrown out, bread that would have fed the rats anyway. But in Dry Gulch, survival itself was considered a crime when you had nothing to pay for it. I ain't stolen nothing that wasn't already spoiled, Evie shouted back, her voice carrying the defiance that had kept her alive on these unforgiving streets for 3 years since her parents died of cholera. Morrison's face twisted with cruel satisfaction. Judge'll see it different, missy, but I got a better idea. He gestured toward the saloon's batwing doors where the sound of raucous laughter and clinking glasses spilled into the street. Game's going strong tonight. High stakes. Evie's blood ran cold. She'd heard whispers of Morrison's debts, of how he'd bet away his wife's jewelry and his store's profits, but she'd never imagined he'd stoop this low. You can't be serious, she whispered, backing away until her shoulders hit the wall. Dead serious. You're coming with me, girl. Time you learned what you're really worth. The saloon reeked of stale tobacco, cheap whiskey, and broken dreams. Evie's wrists were bound with rough rope that bit into her skin as Morrison dragged her toward the corner table where 5 men sat hunched over their cards. The oil lamps cast dancing shadows on their weathered faces, making them look like demons from her worst nightmares. Gentlemen, Morrison announced, his voice thick with false cheer, I got something better than money to throw in the pot. The men looked up with varying degrees of interest and disgust. At the head of the table sat Blackjack Henley, a man whose reputation for cruelty stretched across 3 counties. His cold blue eyes fixed on Evie with the same calculating look he might give a horse he was considering buying. What's the girl's story? Asked a thin man with a gold tooth. Orphan, no family, no prospects. But she's strong, been surviving on her own for years. Someone could get good use out of her. Evie's cheeks burned with shame and fury. I ain't property to be gambled away, she spat, pulling against her bonds. Blackjack leaned back in his chair, studying her with amusement. Got some fire in her, I'll give you that. What's your asking price, Morrison? $50 in chips. Take it or leave it. The other men exchanged glances. $50 was more than most people in Dry Gulch saw in a year, but to these men, it was just another hand of poker. I'll take that bet, Blackjack said, his voice as smooth as snake oil. But if I win, the girl comes with me. If I lose, he shrugged. Well, she's still better off than she was. The next hour passed in a blur of shuffling cards and mounting tension. Evie watched helplessly as her fate was decided by the turn of each card. The men barely glanced at her, treating her like a piece of furniture to be won or lost. But through it all, she kept her chin high, her green eyes blazing with unbroken spirit. When the final card was played, Blackjack's triumphant laugh echoed through the saloon. Morrison's face had gone pale. He'd lost not just Evie, but his store and everything else he'd owned. Pleasure doing business with you, Morrison, Blackjack said, gathering his winnings. He stood and grabbed Evie's rope like a leash. Come on, girl. Time to see your new home. As they stepped out into the cold night air, Evie looked back at the saloon one last time. The warm glow of the windows seemed to mock her, representing everything she'd never have. Warmth, safety, belonging. But even as fear gnawed at her stomach, she refused to let it break her. What's your name? Blackjack asked as they walked toward his horse. Evangeline McCain, she replied, her voice steady despite everything. And I ain't afraid of you. Blackjack's laughter was like the howl of a coyote. We'll see about that, little Evangeline. We'll see about that. The cattle baron's intervention. The journey to Blackjack's ranch took 3 days through some of the most desolate country in Texas. Evie's hands remained bound, and she was forced to walk behind Blackjack's horse, stumbling over rocks and struggling to keep up. The desert sun blazed down mercilessly during the day, while the nights brought bone-chilling cold that made her teeth chatter. On the 3rd morning, they crested a hill that overlooked a vast valley. In the distance, Evie could see Blackjack's ranch, a collection of ramshackle buildings surrounded by a fence that looked more like a prison than a home. But what caught her attention was the massive herd of cattle being driven across the valley floor by a group of riders. Looks like we got company, Blackjack muttered, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. The riders approached with the fluid grace of men who'd spent their lives in the saddle. At their head rode a man who commanded attention without saying a word. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with steel gray hair and eyes the color of a winter storm. His clothes were well-made but practical, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never had to prove his worth to anyone. "Henley," the man said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Thought you were supposed to be at the cattle auction in San Antonio." "Change of plans, Garrett," Blackjack replied, his earlier confidence visibly shaken. "Had some personal business to attend to." Thomas Garrett, for that was indeed the legendary cattle baron whose name was spoken with equal parts respect and fear across Texas, let his gaze settle on Evie. She met his eyes without flinching, though her heart pounded at the intensity of his stare. "And what personal business would that be?" Garrett asked, his tone deceptively casual. "None of your concern. The girl's mine, fair and square." Garrett dismounted with fluid grace, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with finality. "Fair and square, you say? That's interesting, considering the girl looks like she's been dragged behind your horse for the better part of a week." "She's fine, just a little tired from the journey." "Tired?" Garrett stepped closer, and Evie could see the controlled fury in his eyes. "Her wrists are bleeding from those ropes, her lips are cracked from thirst, and she's swaying on her feet." "That's not tired, Henley. That's abuse." Blackjack's hand moved to his gun, but Garrett was faster. In one smooth motion, he drew his Colt .45 and leveled it at Blackjack's chest. "I wouldn't," Garrett said quietly. "My boys have you covered from 6 different angles." Indeed, Evie could see Garrett's men positioned strategically around them, their rifles ready. These weren't the drunken gamblers from the saloon. These were professionals, men who lived and died by their skill with weapons. "What do you want, Garrett?" Blackjack asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I want to make you an offer. Name your price for the girl. She ain't for sale." "Everything's for sale, Henley. The question is whether you're smart enough to take a good deal when it's offered." Evie watched this exchange with growing amazement. In her 16 years, no one had ever stood up for her like this. No one had ever looked at her treatment as wrong, let alone something worth fighting over. $500, Blackjack said suddenly. Garrett raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot of money for a girl you won with poker chips." "Take it or leave it." "I'll take it." Garrett holstered his gun and nodded to one of his men, who produced a leather pouch heavy with coins. "But I want the sale documented, legal and proper." As the two men conducted their business, Evie felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief that she wouldn't be going to Blackjack's ranch, but also apprehension about what this new man might want with her. She'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with a price. When the transaction was complete, Garrett approached her. Up close, she could see the weathered lines around his eyes and the scars on his hands, marks of a man who'd worked hard for everything he'd achieved. "What's your name, child?" he asked gently. "Evangeline McCain," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Evangeline McCain, it seems you're coming home with me." He produced a knife and carefully cut the ropes binding her wrists. "But first, let's get you some water and food. You look like you haven't had either in days." As Garrett's men shared their provisions with her, Evie studied her new guardian. He was nothing like the men she'd known in Dry Gulch. There was a steadiness about him, a sense of honor that seemed as natural as breathing. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why did you help me?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "Because," he said finally, "every person deserves a chance to choose their own path. You were never given that chance. Maybe it's time you were." The Iron Rose Ranch. The Iron Rose Ranch stretched across the horizon like a kingdom carved from the Texas wilderness. As they rode through the main gate, Evie's eyes widened at the sight of the sprawling estate. The main house was a 2-story structure built from local stone and timber, with a wide wraparound porch that spoke of cool evenings and quiet conversations. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, stables, barns, a blacksmith shop, and neat rows of bunkhouses for the ranch hands. "Welcome to Iron Rose," Garrett said, dismounting near the main house. "Named after my late wife, Rose. She had a will of iron and a heart of gold." Evie slid down from the horse Garrett had given her, her legs shaky from the long ride. Everything about this place spoke of prosperity and order, things she'd never experienced in her young life. "Mr. Garrett," she said hesitantly, "what exactly do you expect from me? I ain't never worked a ranch before." Garrett studied her for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "First thing you need to understand, Evangeline, is that this isn't a transaction. I didn't buy you to work for me. I bought you to give you a chance at something better. But I got to earn my keep somehow. I ain't no charity case." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Garrett's mouth. "No, I can see that. Very well. We'll start with the basics. Can you read and write?" Evie's cheeks burned with shame. "Some. My ma taught me a little before she died." "Then that's where we begin. Maria," he called toward the house. A woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40 years old, with kind brown eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. When she saw Evie, her face immediately softened with maternal concern. "Dios mío, what happened to this poor child?" she exclaimed, rushing forward. "This is Evangeline McCain," Garrett said. "She'll be staying with us." I was hoping you could help her get settled. Maria took one look at Evie's torn dress, her tangled hair, and her bleeding wrists, and her face hardened with protective fury. The poor Nina. Come, mija, let's get you cleaned up and fed properly. As Maria led her toward the house, Evie caught Garrett's arm. Mr. Garrett, I don't understand. Why are you being so kind to me? Garrett's expression grew distant, as if he were seeing something beyond the present moment. I had a daughter once, he said quietly. She would have been about your age now. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save you. The bathroom was a marvel Evie had never experienced. A real bathtub with hot water, soap that smelled like lavender, and thick towels that felt like clouds against her skin. Maria bustled about, providing fresh clothes and tending to Evie's wounds with the gentle efficiency of a woman who'd raised children. Senor Garrett, he is a good man, Maria said as she helped Evie into a simple but well-made dress. He has much pain in his heart, but he tries to help others when he can. What happened to his daughter? Evie asked. Maria's hands stilled for a moment. Cholera, 5 years ago. She and Senora Rose both, taken within a week of each other. He has not been the same since. That evening, Evie sat at the kitchen table with Maria, learning to properly use a fork and knife while she devoured the best meal she'd had in years. The house felt strange around her, too quiet, too clean, too peaceful. She kept expecting something to go wrong, for someone to tell her it was all a mistake. Tomorrow, Maria said, we will start your lessons. Reading, writing, numbers. Senor Garrett, he wants you to have an education. But what about ranch work? I can't just be a burden. Maria smiled. Mija, you have much to learn about this place. Senor Garrett, he does not do things without purpose. If he brought you here, it is because he sees something in you. Your job is to become worthy of that faith. That night, Evie lay in her own bed for the first time in 3 years. The room was small but comfortable, with a window that looked out over the endless Texas sky. The silence was both peaceful and unsettling. She'd grown accustomed to the sounds of the street, the constant need to stay alert. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about Garrett's words. Every person deserves a chance to choose their own path. For the first time in her life, that path seemed like it might lead somewhere other than desperation and despair, breaking wild horses and wilder hearts. 3 months had passed since Evie's arrival at Iron Rose Ranch, and the transformation was remarkable. Under Maria's patient tutelage, she'd learned to read with fluency and write with a careful hand. Her body had filled out with proper nutrition, and her green eyes had regained their spark. But it was her introduction to the ranch's daily operations that truly revealed her character. That Mustang's been giving us trouble for weeks, said Jake Williams, Garrett's foreman, as he gestured toward the corral where a magnificent black stallion pranced and snorted. Caught him running with a wild herd up in the hills. He's got good bloodlines, but he's got the devil in him. Evie leaned against the fence, studying the horse with interest. She'd been helping with the gentler horses for weeks now, but this one was different. His eyes held the same desperate defiance she recognized in herself, the look of a creature that had learned to trust no one. He's scared, she said quietly. Scared? Jake laughed. That horse ain't scared of nothing, he's pure mean. No, Evie said firmly. Look at his eyes. He's terrified. Someone hurt him bad. Garrett appeared beside them, his attention drawn by the discussion. What makes you say that, Evangeline? See how he favors his left side, and the way he shies away from the rope? Someone beat him, probably tried to break him with cruelty instead of patience. Jake frowned. Even if that's true, what difference does it make? We can't spend weeks trying to gentle every horse that comes through here. Maybe not, Evie said, but you can't break what's already broken. You gotta heal it first. That afternoon, against Jake's protests, Evie entered the corral with nothing but an apple and infinite patience. The stallion immediately backed away, his ears pinned flat against his head. But Evie didn't approach him directly. Instead, she sat down in the center of the corral and began to talk, not to the horse, but to herself, as if she were alone. I know how it feels, she said conversationally, taking a bite of the apple. Being scared all the time, not knowing who you can trust, makes you want to fight everything, doesn't it? Even the people trying to help. The horse's ears twitched forward slightly, intrigued despite himself. I've been there, Evie continued. Thought the whole world was against me. Took me a while to learn that some people, they're different. They don't want to hurt you or use you. They just want to give you a chance. Day after day, Evie returned to the corral. She never rushed, never forced the issue. Gradually, the stallion began to approach her, drawn by her calm presence and the treats she offered. When he finally allowed her to touch his neck, even Jake had to admit he was impressed. I ain't never seen nothing like it, he told Garrett. That girl's got a gift. But Evie's true test came on a scorching July afternoon, when trouble arrived in the form of Clayton Murdoch, a neighboring rancher with a reputation for ruthless business practices. He rode up to the main house with a dozen armed men, his face twisted with barely contained rage. "Garrett," he shouted. "Get out here, we need to talk." Garrett emerged from the house, his hand resting casually on his gun. "What's on your mind, Murdoch?" "You know damn well what's on my mind. That water rights dispute. You think you can just steal my land and I'll roll over?" "I haven't stolen anything," Garrett replied calmly. "I bought that land fair and square from the bank when you defaulted on your loan. That water feeds my cattle. Without it, my herd'll die. Then you should have thought of that before you gambled away your mortgage money." Murdoch's face turned purple with rage. "You think you're so high and mighty, don't you? Living in your fancy house with your fancy ways. Well, I got news for you, Garrett. This ain't over, not by a long shot." Evie watched from the porch as Murdoch and his men rode away, their threats hanging in the air like smoke. She'd seen men like Murdoch before, men who took what they wanted and destroyed anything that stood in their way. "He's going to cause trouble," she said to Garrett later that evening. "Most likely," Garrett agreed. "Men like Murdoch don't know when to quit. Why don't you just give him access to the water? Seems like it would solve everything." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "Because if I give in to his threats, every other rancher in the county will think they can bully me. Sometimes you have to stand your ground even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous, especially then." That night, Evie lay awake thinking about Garrett's words. She'd never had anything worth fighting for before, but now she did. Iron Rose Ranch had become her home, and Thomas Garrett had become the father she'd never had. If trouble was coming, she'd be ready for it. When the dust settles. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday in late August. Evie was in the stable feeding the horses when she heard the first gunshots. Through the open door she could see riders approaching the main house, their faces hidden behind bandanas. But she recognized Clayton Murdoch's distinctive black hat and silver-studded vest immediately. "Maria, get down!" she heard Garrett shout from the house. Evie's mind raced. She could run, hide in the hills until the danger passed. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But as she looked at the ranch that had become her home, she knew she couldn't abandon the people who'd given her everything. The black stallion, whom she'd named Shadow, stood in his stall, his eyes alert and ready. Over the past weeks, their bond had grown stronger, built on mutual respect and understanding. If there was ever a time she needed his speed and courage, it was now. "Come on, boy," she whispered, leading him out of the stall. "Time to prove what we're made of." She rode Shadow bareback the way she'd learned as a child, her body moving in perfect harmony with the horse's powerful stride. The ranch hands were pinned down behind the bunkhouse, unable to reach the main house where Garrett and Maria were trapped. "Jake," she called to the foreman, "can you get to the big barn?" "Maybe. Why?" "There's dynamite in there left over from blasting the new well. If I can create a distraction, you might be able to circle around behind them." Jake's face went pale. "Evie, that's too dangerous. You're just a girl." "I'm the only one with a horse fast enough to outrun their bullets," she replied, "and I know every inch of this ranch." Before Jake could stop her, she was racing toward the house, Shadow's hooves thundering against the hard-packed earth. Murdoch's men turned their guns on her, but she was ready for them. She'd learned to read the intentions of dangerous men long before she'd learned to read books. She guided Shadow in a zigzag pattern, using the outbuildings as cover while she made her way to the main house. When she reached the porch, she vaulted from Shadow's back and rolled behind the stone foundation just as bullets shattered the windows above her. "Evangeline!" Garrett's voice was tight with fear and anger. "What in blazes are you doing?" "Saving your stubborn hide," she replied, crawling toward the back door. "Jake's going for the dynamite. We need to keep them busy. You should have stayed in the stable where it was safe." "Ain't nowhere safe when men like Murdoch decide they want something," she said, checking her revolver. "A gift from Garrett on her 17th birthday. Besides, this is my home too. I ain't letting anyone take it." For the next hour, they held their ground against Murdoch's assault. Evie proved to be a crack shot, her years of hunting rabbits and prairie dogs in the wilderness serving her well. When Jake finally managed to set off the dynamite charges, creating a massive explosion that spooked Murdoch's horses and scattered his men, the tide began to turn. "This ain't over, Garrett," Murdoch screamed as he retreated with his remaining men. "You hear me? This ain't over." But Evie could see the defeat in his eyes. Murdoch was a bully, and bullies only understood strength. Today, they'd shown him that Iron Rose Ranch was stronger than his threats. As the dust settled and the wounded were tended to, Garrett found Evie sitting on the porch with Shadow, her hands shaking with delayed reaction to the violence. "You could have been killed," he said quietly, settling beside her. "So could you," she replied. "Guess we're both too stubborn for our own good." "I suppose we are." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your parents would have been proud of you today. You showed real courage." "I learned it from you," Evie said. "You taught me that some things are worth fighting for." "And what's that?" She looked out over the ranch at the land that had become her sanctuary and the people who'd become her family. "Home," she said simply. "Family. The chance to choose your own path instead of having it chosen for you." Garrett nodded slowly. "That's a lesson worth learning, Evangeline." and a lesson worth teaching. The inheritance of courage. 2 years had passed since the attack on Iron Rose Ranch, and Evie McCain had grown into a formidable young woman. At 19, she possessed a rare combination of strength and grace, her green eyes reflecting the wisdom earned through hardship and the confidence born of genuine acceptance. The ranch had prospered under her growing influence, her natural ability with horses making her an invaluable asset to the operation. On a crisp October morning, Evie stood in the main corral, working with a young mare that had been brought in from the wild herds. Her reputation as a horse whisperer had spread throughout Texas, and ranchers from as far as Austin sought her expertise with their most difficult animals. "Easy, girl," she murmured, her voice carrying the patience she'd learned from her own healing. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." Garrett watched from the fence, his face showing pride mixed with a deep melancholy. The years had been kind to him in many ways. His ranch had expanded, his herds had multiplied, and his reputation as a fair and honorable man had only grown stronger. But his health had begun to fail, and both he and Evie knew that their time together was precious. "She's beautiful," he said as the mare finally allowed Evie to run her hands along her neck. "Reminds me of you when you first arrived, wild and scared but with so much potential." "I was never that graceful," Evie replied with a smile. "I was more like a porcupine, all bristles and bad attitude. You were exactly what you needed to be to survive. The grace came later, when you felt safe enough to let it show." That afternoon, Garrett called Evie into his study, a room lined with books and legal documents, the center of his vast empire. He looked tired, older than his 62 years, but his eyes held the same steady strength that had first impressed her. "Evangeline, we need to discuss your future," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "My future's here," she replied immediately. "Iron Rose is my home. I know that, but I need to make sure it remains your home, no matter what happens to me." Evie's heart clenched. They'd avoided this conversation for months, but she could see the signs, the way he tired more easily, the pain he tried to hide, the visits from Dr. Morrison that became more frequent. "You're not going anywhere," she said firmly. "You're too stubborn to die." Garrett's laugh was soft but tired. "I'm afraid even stubbornness has its limits." He pulled out a stack of legal papers. "I've been working with my attorney in San Antonio. I want to make sure everything is in order." "What kind of everything?" "Iron Rose Ranch. All of it. The land, the cattle, the buildings, the bank accounts. I'm leaving it all to you." Evie stared at him in shock. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. You've earned this, Evangeline, not just through your work, but through your character. You've shown that you understand what this place represents." "But I'm nobody. I'm just an orphan girl you bought for $500. "You're the daughter I chose," Garrett said quietly. "Blood doesn't make a family, Evangeline. Love does. Commitment does. The willingness to sacrifice for each other does. You've shown me all of that and more." Tears streamed down Evie's cheeks. "I don't know how to run an empire like this." "You've been running it for the past year," Garrett replied. "I've just been watching and offering advice. The men respect you, the neighbors trust you, and you have the instincts of a born leader. More importantly, you have the heart to do what's right, even when it's difficult." Over the following weeks, Garrett began the process of formally transferring ownership of Iron Rose Ranch to Evie. The legal papers were complex, but the message was simple. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd been sold for poker chips. She was a woman of substance, a landowner, a leader in her community. The transition wasn't without challenges. Some of the neighboring ranchers questioned whether such a young woman could manage such a vast operation. But Evie had learned from the best, and she approached each challenge with the same combination of intelligence, determination, and compassion that had made Garrett respected throughout Texas. When Clayton Murdoch made one final attempt to seize control of the ranch, claiming that the water rights dispute was still valid, Evie faced him down in the town courthouse with a stack of legal documents and the backing of every honest rancher in the county. "Miss McCain," Murdoch sneered, "you're way out of your depth. This is a man's world, and you're just a little girl playing dress-up." "Mr. Murdoch," Evie replied, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned from Garrett, "I may be young, but I'm not naive. I know exactly what you're trying to do, and I have the legal standing to stop you. We'll see about that." "Yes, we will." The judge ruled in Evie's favor, not just because her legal position was stronger, but because her reputation for fairness and honesty had earned her the respect of the community. Murdoch left the courthouse defeated, his last attempt at intimidation having failed against the quiet strength of a young woman who'd learned to stand her ground. That evening, as Evie sat on the porch of the main house, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the saloon in Dry Gulch to the courthouse in San Antonio, she'd traveled a path that seemed impossible for an orphan girl with nothing but defiance to her name. Garrett joined her, moving slowly but with dignity. "How does it feel to be a cattle baron?" he asked. "Strange. she admitted. Sometimes I still feel like that scared girl hiding in the shadows, waiting for someone to take it all away. That feeling never completely goes away, Garrett said, but it reminds you not to take anything for granted. Hold on to that humility, Evangeline. It'll serve you well. As the sun set over the vast expanse of Iron Rose Ranch, Evie thought about the future. She would face new challenges, make difficult decisions, and probably make enemies along the way. But she was no longer the powerless girl who'd been sold for poker chips. She was Evangeline McCain, owner of Iron Rose Ranch, and she had the strength to face whatever came next. The Defiant orphan had become a woman of substance not through luck or charity, but through the courage to grow beyond her circumstances and the wisdom to recognize that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. In the distance, Shadow grazed peacefully in the pasture, his wild spirit tamed but not broken, just like his mistress, who had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting the world, but from finding your place within it and making it better for your presence.